they're in a state of separateness, and yet the Orient Stove can still be found there. Because that's the nature of the concept. Orient Stove is lamata mata adin tachlis. It goes infinitely low into places where it sort of shouldn't be able to reveal. The lechein nikra bia mata, and that's why the world's briyatzir and asiya. That's called mata. It means below. In other words, when we talk about lamay lamayla, it essentially refers to, which means higher. It refers to the infinite worlds and the world of Atzilus. And we talk about mata mata, the lower worlds. That's already starting from Bri, Yitzir, and Asiyah. And why is that cut off there? Because that's where the garments start. They're like in no way comparable to the body. They're merely garments for the light of Atzilus. They're not anymore the actual body of Atzilus. Now, when it comes to the garments of Bia, it says, I just had a deep dive into the Sephardi Siddur, so you read this every morning, right? Pasach Eliyahu. It says over there that from them souls fly out of man, which they are the neshamas, right? So in other words, the garments of Bia, it says, Minayu, from them, parchin nishmasin livnei nasha, souls of man fly out, shehem neshamas. That's what in general we call the neshamos. Now, I have to draw upon the Rebbe's Mimer. Remember, this is the year 13, so we just did a very deep dive into this chapter. And quite frankly, after you read the Rebbe's Maimarim on any of the chapters, you really can't go back and just read it, because he elucidates it and enlightens and shows you like what's really being said in so many levels that almost just reading it regularly it doesn't even make any sense anymore. So what the Rebbe sort of inserts here, like kind of this year's theme, and he explains that essentially there's three levels in general in like reality. There's that which is called Elokus, Neshamos, and Olamos. Right? This is not going to be found in this mimer. It's the Rebbe's explanation on this chapter. What is the Elokus, Neshamos, Olamos? So Elokus in general refers to the worlds before Atzilus. It's like pure godliness. Neshamos refers to the world of Atzilus. Because just like a neshama, godliness sort of takes a form. Right? Your neshama is basically purely God, like it says in Tanya, that the neshama is a chelek elukah mimal mamish. The soul is literally a piece of God. But if it's literally a piece of God, it's in a state of sort of oneness with everything else. When it takes form, it becomes a neshama. It doesn't become something other than God. It's just like God in a form. Just like we're saying, God sort of takes the body, the form of a man in the world of Atzilus. Like the prophet said, they saw a man sitting on the chariot. So that's in general, like the neshama, it takes on the form of the 10 spheros. And then olamos, so godliness, elokus, neshamos, olamos refers to biyah, right, the lower worlds. So what he's saying here is kind of interesting, is that even though we're now discussing that biyah is like called lamata, you got to put your thinking cap on for a second. We're going to play with this a little bit, which means biyah is merely in the realm of garments. It's only worlds, right? It's not souls and it's not godliness. It's disconnected. But then it says in Pasach Eliyahu in this verse that souls fly out from man from those garments, from these worlds. Well, that kind of contradicts what we just said, because we just said the souls come from where? Atzilus, right? They're called, right? There's Elokus, Neshamos, and Olamos. 3 levels. Beyond Atzilus, and Biyah. Mm-hmm. Moshe, you keep following along. So where are the souls supposed to be coming out from?
The garments.
Atzilus. I know it said that, but I'm saying, according to what I'm saying now, godliness, souls, worlds, souls should come from the middle, which is the what world? Atzilus, right? And yet, what does it say here? That Hashem fashioned garments for that man, which is the worlds of Bri, Yitzir, and Asiyah, not Atzilus. And then it says, Minayhu parchen nishmasin livnei nasha. And from those lower worlds, souls fly out for man. That doesn't really jive, right? We just said the souls come from Atzilus. Now we're saying they come out from Biyah. And here's what he says: Dihine rov haneshamos, because most of the souls hen neshamos de Biyah. They're actually souls of Biyah, Bri, Yitzir, and Asiyah. V'rak chad b'dar b'daras harishonim. Only one in a generation, in the early generations, and the Rebbe in his Maimer says how much more so in the later generations. Even in the early generations, there was only one soul that came into a body where his soul actually came directly from the world of Atzilus, and the consciousness of Atzilus entered into a physical body and he like saw the world through the eyes of the world of Atzilus. Only one in a generation, even in the early generations. And the Rebbe says how much more so in the later generations. There's only one soul in the entire Jewish people. He goes pretty deep into this concept. Obviously, the Rebbe speaks about this a lot. That is holding this soul of Atzilus while he's yet in this physical world. But most of the souls, in other words, the rest of us, we have what's called neshamas from Biyah, right? Which means that our souls, even though they originate in Atzilus, because all souls originate in Atzilus, but they sort of take the slow train and they come and the souls go into the separated garment-like world of Biyah. In which case, even the souls, this is a very dramatic statement that he's basically saying here, even our souls, which are supposed to be sort of like the agents of bringing godliness into this world, they themselves already take on the consciousness of a garment. They don't maintain their original consciousness of what the world of souls was, which was basically a clear and open understanding of godliness. We said Atzilus was a kli for godliness, which means your soul, godliness is revealed in your soul in its origin in Atzilus. But when your soul comes down and like sort of takes a dip into Biyah, even your soul loses the consciousness of Atzilus, and it too becomes garment-like. Not just your body, your soul. Only one in a generation maintains the consciousness of Atzilus when he comes into a physical body. That's the Nasi Ador. That's the like Moshe Rabbeinu and his Pashtusa delay and his extension in every generation. Aval rov and neshamas hem neshamas de Biyah. But the vast majority of the neshamas, like every single one of us except for one, right, that our very souls already take the consciousness of a garment. Elish b'Biyah gufa, but so in other words, if then who's going to save the day over here? The purpose of reality is that godliness should come up and express itself even in the lowest realms. Well, even if the agents who are supposed to be sent to do that, which are the Jews who like sort of have some kind of a consciousness of godliness, if even we are stripped of that consciousness and become garment-like, how are we supposed to do our job here of bringing Elokus into the lowest world? You getting the question? Mm-hmm. And the answer is because in Biyah itself, right, there's three levels. Right? Hine neshamas hem panemias, malachim chitzonim, va'olmos hem chitzoni dichitzoni. So I spoke to you about three levels before. There's a different set of three levels. The three levels we spoke about before were the worlds before the Ein Sof, Atzilus, and Biyah. But in Biyah itself, there's three levels called the Panemius, which is the inner dimension of those worlds, which even though it is still garment-like, but it's the inner dimension of the garment, which means it's basically the channel through which actual divine experience can be channeled into the lower worlds. And that's the neshamas. So when they say the neshamas are from Biyah, it's true. They get this sort of garment-like disconnect. But in Biyah itself, they're called the Panemia. So they sort of have their finger on the pulse, and they're Torah and mitzvahs doers, which means somehow in that state of separateness, they're able to connect themselves to a type of godliness. And then that godliness itself is going to have an effect on the external type parts of the garment, which is the angels, which will then have an effect on the external part of the garments, which is the worlds. So in other words, in the worlds of Biyah, what we're saying is the lower worlds, which are all considered like garments, there's three levels, which is basically, you could put it like, if you want to sort of understand like maybe a little muscle for it, it's like take a cup. A cup has three levels, right? You have the inside, which touches the liquid. You have the cup itself, just the body of the cup, and then you have this concept that it is the external part of the cup enables it to be held and drunk from, right? It's like it becomes like a useful, active action. It's not just the body of the cup sitting there as a cup. It's then like the ability for it to be held and contained and sort of used, right? So it's like inner, middle, outer, and in general, there's this every kli has its inner, middle, and outer. We call it rosh, toch, and sof, right? So the souls are the inner dimension, which means even though we're also part of a garment, but we touch the liquid, right? Which means that the true Elokus finds like a commonality with us in Torah mitzvahs, we can sort of grab onto the liquid, which is the light, which is the essential godliness, even though we're just a garment, but we're a garment which is close to the light and can hold the light. And when we hold the light, then it has an effect on angels, which are basically the like sort of shluchim from between us and the actual materialism of the world. So he says over here, I'm talking about the Rebbe's mimer, right? I'm just kind of riffing on that for a second. He explains that this is the reason why, if when we daven and we say kadosh, 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 right? It says suddenly the angels get together and say kadosh, right? When the Jewish people come together and pray down here, the angels assemble and they pray as well. So the question is asked, why do they follow our prayer? In other words, seemingly they're higher than us. You know, why do they only get together and gather and sort of have their 3 prayers a day and their aliyah in conjunction when we do it? And the reason is because really we are the source of the angels. This, by the way, this concept, if I can like explain it properly, is mind-blowing and will give you a completely different understanding of your power, right? And who you really are and what you're capable of, right? So he says, because what does it mean? The soul's the Panemia of the world, which means the angels sort of follow us. And this, he explains, this is what it means, the concept of Shir Hashirim, right? The Sefer in the called Shir Hashirim, the Song of Songs. What does it really mean? That the angels sing their songs, and that's how they praise Hashem. Each angel is like busy singing and praising Hashem with song. But the Song of Songs is the Jewish people, the Panemia, the souls. When we sing our song, it's the song of many songs. Because when you do your avoda down here, the angels assemble because you're the interdimensionally, and they're your shluchim. They respond to you. And then when they respond, they basically affect the world, which is the external of the external. So what it comes down to is that it's not as it seems. That there's a big world over here, and there's a few Jews sprinkled into it, and they have sort of like the whole world against them, and there's this like story going on. The spiritual reality is that we are the Panemia of creation, which means that anything that we do is what creation is made out of, right? It starts with us, and then it creates angels and sends them on their way, and that creates the reality of the world. So for good or for bad, unfortunately, right, the entire world is literally like in our hands.
We control the media.
We control the media, right? It's like a mind-boggling thing. When a yid does his avoda, it's like you think you're just sitting in a room by yourself doing nothing. Remember what this mimer is called, right? It's hayosheves baganim, right? Chaverim makshivim b'kolech. If you remember this, it says when you're sitting in the garden, like we Jews. Chaverim, friends, listen to our voices. Remember what we talked about? The friends are the ministering angels who are called friends because they don't have any jealousy, they don't have any competition. They're all mamish keen on every single thing we do. Their whole existence is in a response to the avodah of a yid. So this is again why we can bring Locus into this world, because ultimately, even though our souls are garment-like and they come down to the level of biyah, but they're the Panemia of Biyah, and with Torah mitzvahs, we can affect also the externalities of Biyah. So this is ultimately like how the Orient Sof comes to be revealed in the lowest world through this process. Okay, I'm going to stop with bringing in the outside sources for now. So this is the idea. Any questions on that? Okay. Last line. So we have the internal, the external of the external. Souls, angels, and worlds. And the very final line on the page, when you have so many massive contractions, right, and descents of the light all the way into biyah, from level to level, with so many infinite levels of contraction to the point that the light becomes separate. Or experiences itself as separate. The light gets further and further concealed and hidden from level to level. Now we're going to get even to another crazy topic. Until the light gets to what's called to the world of orbits, galgalim v'mazalos, and planets and
Constellations.
Thank you. Constellations. The light becomes so thick that it actually becomes thickened and corporal and physical. So what we're saying here is the light is basically in Atzilus, it's all shining nicely, it goes down into Biyah, it starts to become like a garment light, but it's still spirituality, right? It's like disconnected a little bit from godliness, but we're still dealing in spiritual worlds, angels and so forth. Then all of a sudden, the light itself, when it comes down into a certain point, which is literally outer space, right? This is talking about outer space, simple as put. Like we're talking about the actual materialism of what's going on in space. And the idea is that there are very, very high levels of creation. You have to understand outer space. Like, right? We have to first change a myth that we all grew up on, learning that they're like balls of gas in the sky that are like inanimate and sort of just static, whatever. The Rambam explains that and we spoke about this the other day, that the stars are conscious beings that are aware of themselves and they're aware of us, right? What's that?
Can you explain consciousness a little more?
In other words, a rock does not have self-awareness. You do have self-awareness, right? They don't have free choice. Just like an animal doesn't have free choice, right? But it's completely self-aware. It feels pain.
It's self-aware enough that it knows that it's a star.
It knows that it's a being of tremendous proportions.
It acknowledges its own existence.
It acknowledges its own existence. It's not just stam like, hey, I exist. It's a brilliant genius, right?
That I'm here and there's other stars out there and they're over there.
They're all aware of each other. They're probably communicating with each other. The idea that they're moving through the sky, it says in many places in Chazal that is basically the song that they sing. You know the story that it says that Yoshua stopped the sun, right? It says Shemesh begivon dom. The line in Sefer Yeshua, when he stopped the sun, he says the sun in Givon, which is the place where they were fighting this battle, dome. He says, be quiet. Why say be quiet? He should have said stop. Because the way that he stopped the sun was basically to get it to stop singing its song. Because why is it, the stars are moving at like breakneck speed. They're moving like billions of miles an hour, right? Why are they going so fast? Because they're in a state of ratzo, like they're running towards Hashem. It says all the stars are going towards the west, right? In the sky, the whole solar system is turning towards the west. And the idea is because the Shekhinah is in the west. Why is the Shekhinah in the west? When you go to the Beis HaMikdash, Hashem, the Holy of Holies, the Ark of the Covenant, it's in the west side of the building. So there's this concept, like the western wall will never be destroyed. Shekhinah is connected with the west for that reason. So the reason that the stars are all going westwardly is because they're all racing towards God westwardly and singing their song. Just like angels, they're singing, right? The song of the sun is its like break speed movement, right? Breakneck speed movement. And therefore, when Yeshua wanted to stop the sun, he had to get it to basically stop singing. So he said, be quiet. And there's a whole midrash, how would he get it to be quiet? He actually sang the song of the sun instead of the sun. So in other words, this is a kind of like a little Hasidic word thrown in there. If you want a person to sort of like be heard and like stop what they're doing and like sort of focused, you have to sing their song. If you sing another person's song back to them, you sort of like capture them, right? Because then you have their attention. It's like they feel heard because someone else it gets them, right? So when he sang the song of the sun was like and it stopped. It's racing. The point is the sun has a song, right? The sun is a genius, right? It's proportional. Like think about how much intelligence fits into your little brain, right? So the intelligence of the sun is like unbelievable, right? The sun is actually used by us as a metaphor for God. Shemesh Umagin Havai Elokim. We talk about the sun and the moon as like Za and Malchus. It's not a simple being, and it's just one star. All the stars, and not only the stars, but what we call the Galgalim, which is the orbits. It's a whole other thing. This, according to Rambam's understanding of reality, the orbits themselves are moving. So the star is not just like racing through empty space; it's racing because it's on an orbit which is actually moving, right? It's on like a plate of some sort, which also has a consciousness. There's like these giant sort of like spheres of plates that the stars are positioned on, and they too are entities with crazy levels of consciousness. The point we're trying to make here is not so much how high and wondrous they are. That's only compared to us. Compared to the life force, which is basically coming down the Seder Ishtalshalus, which is basically divinity, but going from level to level to level to the point that it's basically starting to experience itself as a garment. It gets to the point where it actually becomes a physical entity. So spirituality becomes like thickened and congeals into some type of physicality. The physicality of space is not quite like the physicality of here, but it's similar. You're already dealing with like actual elements, right? And the idea is that right there, boom, is the cutoff point of a crazy delineation. Just like we said, there's the infinite worlds, which are totally different than Atzilus, and Atzilus is totally different than Bria. And we've made a clear delineation that something is profound is happening to the vessels and the light at those important junctures, right? Well, the most profound thing that happens is at this point of the Galgalim and the Mazalos, because they're not things. They're just godliness. There is nothing but godliness. But godliness that becomes mamish coarsened to the point that it thickens and becomes an entity. But it's really nothing other than God.
It's Yetzirah.
What's that? That's the actual planets and orbits in this world. Yeah. Right? The physical sky that you see above. These intelligent beings that I was just talking about. They're really just a congealing of divine energy. They're not something other than that. They look like things. Everything looks like an independent thing. But we're trying to explain like how to get to this point. It's the first notion of like true independence that like becomes a thing as opposed to just being some spiritual entity, which is the thing like, but it doesn't have an actual body. It becomes a thing in the Galgalim and the Mazalos.
Each planet and star is like an expression of a single spirit.
Not necessarily a spirit, but an angel, right? Which itself is an expression of a neshama, which is itself expression of a sphera, right? There's Locus.
So like each planet has like a main sphere that it emanates, and like obviously each sphere has like it's made up of all the spheres, but like does each planet have like the main expression of one?
Yeah, in that capacity, I mean, you could say that there's nothing in the world that's not made out of the 10 spheros, right? Yeah. But it takes some. But the truth is that they're not made out of the spheros directly. The spheros directly is the highest level. It's like neshamos. Yeah. What are they made out of? The letters that come out of the spheros. And let me explain, like in an analogy of man, right? You know the tree of life picture diagram. So you have the 10 spheros, but then you have the 22 lines, which are the 22 letters. So everything, the 10 spheres is like the man himself. The 22 letters is what the man says. So even though what you say is going to be some reflection of what you are, it's only words. It's not like the actual spheros. So nothing except for the spheres are actually made out of spheres themselves. Everything else is made out of some product that comes from the spheres, namely letters, right, which are trying to describe the spheres, and that's what makes up all the right, letters of thought, speech, and action, which is essentially Bri, Yitzir, and Asiya. So they're all letters actually. There's no spheros there, but each letter combination is a description of some type of sphere. So if I say Chesed, that's just a few letters, but it's referring to a particular type of action from the sphere. All right, so now we've congealed. This is another like wild line. Therefore, all influence and revelation that comes into this lowly world, in other words, the world under the stars, which is planet Earth, of this world, now this is a wild thing because basically the godliness, which is now kind of congealed, it now keeps on flowing down. And it creates everything that you see, hear, feel, and touch in this world. So in other words, how did you get here? You're literally made out of stardust, right? These entities have an influence, and they're not just shiny balls in the sky. They're creating, right? When you go in the sun, you feel heat. Do you know how far away the sun is? Right? It has an absolute direct impact on you, just the heat, let alone like the photosynthesis that's going on. Let alone the orbit, the season that you're in. And these are just like very broad brushstrokes. Because what I'm going to try and explain to you is that every single star in the sky and every single orbit, and you see that they keep finding more and there's billions and we can never get to the end of it. They're not just all kind of randomly there and we're just like another speck of dust. It's all this kaleidoscope which is surrounding the earth, which is at the center. And all of these things are agents of hashpah to assemble life on Earth. So there's not one little star or one little like space activity that's not having some direct input on the literal lives, emotional state, ups and downs, the whole movement and existence of everything that happens in this reality, we say it comes from Hashem, right? But Hashem gets it here through these agents. Not that the agents, again, have free will, but it's like the axe in the hand of the wood chopper, right? Hashem wants to chop wood; he needs an axe. So when the job is actually getting done, it's the axe which is chopping wood. Obviously, the axe has no free will, and obviously, we're not going to thank the axe for this because it's just basically Hashem wearing gloves. But the reality is that the stars themselves are the ones bringing the energy to make everything happen here, right? So there's this. It's basically, this is why in the ancient days this was the science of man. It says Avram Avinu was a great astrologer. That's why he said he knew he wasn't going to have any children, right? We see just like little fraction and tidbits of it from the Chazal. But the reality is he didn't just know he wasn't going to have any children. He knew, as it says in the Zohar, everything that was going to happen to every nation at any given time. He knew basically like the thoughts of man. He was a stargazer to the point that he understood how everything up there was directing every single blade of grass down here. He was the master. Right? Avram Avinu was no joke. He was the greatest seer of all times. And this is what he saw. He could see how everything above was influencing and making everything happen down here. It said there's said of this vort that he came to one difficulty. He saw that there was one constellation that was actually driving all the other ones. There was like a Panemia, like we were saying before. There was like an internal one, the Song of Songs. He saw all the songs, and he saw how everything was being driven by all these songs of the angels, and mamish, every blade of grass was coming from this sign or that sign or this sign. But he saw that there was a song of songs, and he couldn't figure out what it was. And that's when he got the command, Lech Lecha. Right? But he said, you have to go to Eretz Yisrael, because that mazel that you're seeing, which controls all the other mazalos, is the mazel of Yisrael. And you're not going to be able to understand it unless you're in it. Nice of Nishma. So that's all of a sudden when Avram was given, that's the first time, by the way, we hear that Hashem spoke to Avram, is when he basically took him out of the mazalos. Avram means Av is Chochmah, Ram means exalted. So his name, before he got the name Avraham, it was Avram. It was his exalted Chochmah. He was the biggest genius the world ever seen. And he got to the peak of his genius. There was something that was beyond his genius, and it was basically Eretz Yisrael. There's something beyond the nature of the universe. Lech Lecha. So we had to go to Eretz Yisrael. The point I'm trying to make is that all these, the shefa of divinity becomes material in the stars, and then it continues to come down and make everything in this world happen. All influence of this physical world. And where do we see this? It sounds crazy. I don't know if you're realizing the ridiculousness of what I'm saying, because we don't really see or feel any particular connection with the stars, especially as we sort of, block out the night sky with all of our electricity, everything. It's like, what do we have to do with that? But the truth is, we don't feel any particular connection with the ground either, right? But everything we eat, all the oxygen we breathe, our cells are made out of matter, right? Where does the matter come from? The very existence of our cells, we don't realize it's actually being produced by forces at any given time. And these forces are not just the earth, it's everything in the universe. It's mamish making things be. Again, not with free will, but they're the agents, they're the gloves of Hashem. And we see, we'll just finish with this. There's a pasuk in Torah which basically says this, as it says, in the blessing of Yosef, right? He's told that you're going to have the delicacies of the sun's bounty and of the moon's produce, right? The moon's bounty, whatever. It's another word for bounty. I forget right now. Harvest, right? So I know it's just a simple line, but this line is used frequently in Hasidus to explain this very point. That there's certain crops grown by the sun, and there's certain crops grown by the moon. And basically we see that, for example, nightshades, pumpkins, these things, they grow at night. They grow from the power of the moon. Certain things grow from the power of the sun. That's just a small little tiny window into explaining to you how the influence from this solar system is what's making everything happen over here. It's not just pumpkins and wheat. It's every action of every nation, every breath you take, basically, is sort of being powered and filtered by the solar system. As another saying of the sages says, "Ein lecha eisa milamata she'ein lo mazel milamayla makabo v'omer b'lo gadel." We usually read this in a spiritual sense, which says there's no blade of grass below that doesn't have a mazel. We usually read that as like some kind of an angel from above that strikes it and tells it to grow. Right? So in every blade of grass is not just sitting there. It's part of a hishtalshlus of world after world after world, godliness going down, 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 down until it materializes a blade of grass. What he's saying here is that it's not from a spiritual mazel. It's literally there's a certain constellation which is involved in the existence of every single blade of grass. It comes from the light of godliness, which flows through the planets and the constellations, or the orbits and the constellations. And think about the humility of Hashem. It's such a lowliness that godliness comes all the way down, and mamish manifests itself as a blade of grass. It's godliness. And he allows himself to mamish look like a blade of grass. You can trample on it and just think that it's mamish blowing in the wind. There's so many contractions, so many concealments of biyah until it actually manifests as physicality, this external-most thing, which is nothing other than godliness. Okay, so we're going to start the next line tomorrow, which is going to take us even to a further dip. But the point we're trying to make here is with all that, since it is godliness, and the Orein Sof is Lamata Mata Adein Tachlis, that the idea is that even in this place where it's mamish congealed, it's still Orein Sof. It's not a planet. It's not a blade of grass. It's Orein Sof, and therefore mamish infinity can still be found here, and it's nothing other than God Himself. That's the point of what we're trying to get to.